getting started momentarily here. I want to formally introduce your presenter to you today. Her name is Dr. Beth Rogowski, and she has 14 years of classroom experience teaching English language arts to middle-level learners in both rural and urban settings. Most recently, Dr. Rogowski completed postdoctoral training at the Center for Molecular and Behavioral Neuroscience at Rutgers University under the mentorship of Dr. Paula Talal, a world-renowned neuroscientist specializing in the neural basis of language and literacy development and disorders. Currently, Dr. Rogowski is an assistant professor at Bloomsburg University of Pennsylvania. So please help me welcome Dr. Beth Rogowski. And Dr. Rogowski, I'm going to be putting your presentation up here for everyone to see, and you can get started.
Oh, great. Can you hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Oh, wonderful. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for taking the time out of your day to join me here. The title of my talk is Building Better Writers Without Picking Up a Pen. Several weeks ago, Paula did an excellent job presenting the results of Fast Forward on college students' writing skills. That study was actually inspired from my original work using Fast Forward with a heterogeneous group of sixth grade students. And that is what we are going to address today, the effects of computer-based cognitive and literacy skills training on middle school students' writing skills. And what you see on this slide are some of the sixth grade students from that original study. As I said, today I'm going to talk to you about that original study. I'll take you through my professional experience as a classroom teacher for 14 years, which led me to research from the fields of both education and cognitive psychology that led me to my hypothesis that literacy and cognitive skills training together improve students' writing skills. I'll share with you my study design, including a close look at elements of the training that relate specifically to writing instruction. And we will wrap up with the results, which found that Fast Forward training significantly improved the sixth grade students' writing skills. I mentioned to you that I was an English teacher for 14 years. Each year I worked with a new set of students. And as you can imagine, many of them were less than enthusiastic about writing. They know that writing is tough. A lot of them have difficulty getting words on paper, let alone writing grammatically correct, complete sentences. But they want to be successful, and I want them to be successful. So back in the 90s, we diagrammed sentences. We talked at length about compound, complex sentences and dangling participles and subject-verb agreement. We watched the videos and sang the songs of Schoolhouse Rock. Lolly, 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 get your adverbs here. I'm waiting for the slide to advance. There we go. Yes, lolly, lolly, get your adverbs here. And busy prepositions, always on the move. I'm sure to many of you that sounds familiar. And we also worked through the steps of the writing process. I also taught writing workshops through mini lessons. I would instruct my students for 10 to 12 minutes on a topic such as appositive phrases, which of course an appositive phrase is a noun or noun phrase that renames the noun it is describing. And I would show them examples. For example, here, Fast Forward, a computer-based cognitive and literacy skills training program, has been shown to improve students' writing skills. And of course, a computer-based cognitive and literacy skills training program is the appositive phrase that describes the noun fast forward. And we would compose examples together, and they would add appositive phrases to their writing. Try as we might, I felt as if we weren't making much progress despite all of our efforts. But I wasn't about to give up because I knew how important good writing skills are. In many cases, writing skills can be the determining factor in getting into college. In fact, since 2005, a writing assessment has comprised 1/3 of the SAT exam. Writing is also a gateway for employment and promotion. So over the years, I tried every strategy I knew, but with no large-scale or lasting success. And unfortunately, my students weren't the only struggling writers. According to our nation's report card, Only 27% of eighth graders are writing at proficient or advanced levels. That means, folks, that 73% of our eighth graders are writing at the basic and below basic level. So let's take a look at a sample prompt found on the NAEP 2011 writing assessment. Imagine that students at your school are going to select a new school mascot. A mascot is an animal or object used to represent a group. For example, many sports teams have mascots. 4 choices are being considered as your school's mascot: tigers, rising stars, dolphins, and rockets. You have been asked to choose one of the 4 mascots and to support your choice in a letter to the school principal. Write a letter to your school principal convincing him or her that your choice should be the school mascot. Be sure to include reasons and examples in your letter. And yes, that is a sample writing prompt for 8th graders from the NAEP 2011 test. What I want you to notice is that before you even put your pencil to the paper, you must stand in awe of the cognitive skills needed to write a successful response. Notice that the students must keep in working memory the definition of a mascot and retrieve from long-term memory any prior knowledge they have regarding mascots from sports teams. Students will not be successful if they are unfamiliar with the term mascot, as this is the content of what they'll be writing. They next consider the 4 choices they have. They visualize tigers, rising stars, dolphins, and rockets. Again, they have to tap into their long-term memory and quickly process each of the 4 options and pick the best one to represent their school. They must focus their attention on their selected mascot and how its qualities relate specifically to their school. They must discern irrelevant from relevant characteristics. At this point, they haven't written anything yet, and some of our students are going to be too mentally overwhelmed to even try, so they give up. And you know who those students are. Others will forge on. And those, they take another look at the directions and notice the type of writing that they've been assigned, a persuasive letter. They need to remember that letters start with a salutation, dear so-and-so, and end with a signature. They visualize their mascots again. They begin to sequence their thoughts in such a way that their audience, the principal, will hopefully be persuaded to choose their mascot. They begin to put the words on the page. Some of them will remember to begin with a capital letter and end with a mark and punctuation. I can clearly go on and on. Bottom line there is nothing easy about writing. What you'll find as I continue my talk is that I believe, based on my own experience and the research of myself and others, that the future of writing instruction needs to focus on literacy training coupled with cognitive skills training. If you could just go back, there we go. Cognitive skills training needs to be part of that literacy training. And the cognitive skills really focusing students' attention, increasing their memory, their processing speed, and sequencing skills. The instruction needs to be replicable and scalable. Here's where computer gaming can help us out. And we need to use research-based practices coming from the basic principles of neuroscience. And we know from neuroplasticity research that the brain is malleable, which translates to a brighter future for everyone. So why is learning to write so difficult? What you hear is what you get. This starts early in life with how the brain organizes sound and continues through an individual schooling where 80% of classroom instruction has been presented orally. When we look at how children acquire language, we find that it starts with phonemic awareness, being able to distinguish between sounds such as ka and ga, and continues as children build their vocabulary and increase their morphological and syntactical awareness in both spoken and written language. After all, spoken language forms the foundation for written language. And continues as children build their vocabulary and increase their morphological and syntactical awareness in both spoken and written language. After all, spoken language forms the foundation for written language. In addition to students' language skills, writing ability is also dependent on students' foundational cognitive skills. Think back to the NAEP writing prompt we considered earlier. In order to write a response, we needed to remember the content and spelling of words. We needed to pay attention to details, like capitalizing the first word and using the correct punctuation throughout the sentence. We needed to sequence the sentence properly. So, for instance, in English, nouns are placed before verbs. And we needed to process all that I've mentioned in a timely fashion in order to keep up with our thoughts or the teacher we are taking notes from in class. Barringer and Wynn propose a model of developing writing. And they call it the not-so-simple view. I love that title. You'll notice that text generation is the goal and at the top of the triangle. At the base of the triangle lies transcription, which includes the visuospatial sketchpad that takes into account not only visualizing the content like school mascots, but also letter formation, getting the shapes of the letters in your head onto the paper. So on one side of the triangle base is transcription, and on the other side is executive function, which is the term to describe goal-directed behaviors. You'll notice, too, that all points of the triangle are connected and dependent on working memory. And we know from Baddeley's model of working memory that working memory includes the phonological loop for verbal information, and that working memory is the glue that keeps the process going as students switch attention to and from the three vertices. It was through this research on language acquisition, nope, we're not there yet, there we go. It was through this research on language acquisition, neuroplasticity, and the cognitive processes of writing that I began to form a hypothesis that if we explicitly train students, starting at the beginning with phonemes, morphology, and syntax, rather than just correcting the mistakes students have already written, which is what instruction typically involves, and if we coupled such retraining with cognitive skills training, we would see an improvement in students' writing skills. What we first have to do is meet students where they are. So where are they? That's right. 87% of those aged 12 to 17 use the internet. That's 21 million teenagers. Of those, 11 million go online daily. As for computer games, 81% of teen internet users play games online, representing 17 million gamers. What I hope you notice about this screen is that the data is from 2005. And I have a feeling, and I think all of you will agree, that the numbers have only increased over the last 8 years. So what are the characteristics of computer games that make them so effective? Computer games have specific objectives, novelty, and they present progressively challenging tasks that adapt to the pace of the gamer. They offer instant corrective feedback, active engagement, and distributed practice to the point of mastery, all of which are research-based strategies for increasing student achievement. And such characteristics of computer-based gaming mesh very nicely with findings from neuroplasticity research, which show that the functional organization of the brain at the cellular level can be changed and behaviors improved through intensive training. And what the studies have found is a need for intense and frequent trials, focused attention to a task, individually adaptive trials, a correction of errors, and timely rewards of correct responses to reinforce learning and maintain motivation. This research from the field of education and cognitive psychology was coming together for me at about the same time the school where I was teaching bought the Fast Forward series of training. I must admit, I was a doubter. I was a veteran teacher, and I was a loud naysayer even. So I decided to go through the training myself. I started by completing the literacy program. And as I was working through the literacy software, it was then that I noticed the implicit grammar instruction embedded in the exercises. And I began to make connections between what these exercises were training and how I was teaching writing. It was this aha moment that turned into my doctoral thesis and the beginning of my career in research. Let me begin by highlighting a few of the examples of the training that relate specifically to writing. In both of the studies I've conducted, students completed the first level of training, which are the literacy exercises. The literacy exercises train every rule of English grammar. This screenshot is from Stellar Stories. In this example, the student hears, "The baby who is hugging the big sister is crying." Notice that you cannot answer this prompt correctly based on vocabulary alone. You must comprehend the grammar. The foils in each command are as important as the correct answer. So, of course, the correct answer is number 2. Not only is the student working with subordinate clauses here, but they are also building their working memory capacity through articulatory rehearsal. Students naturally repeat the sentence silently to themselves, which is the same thing we do as we articulate the words in our head and transcribe them to paper. In this next example, the students hear, "Sally left her lunch on the city bus." Notice the focus is on verb tenses. So in the top left corner, the verb will leave is future tense. In the top right is leaving is present tense. And in the bottom is past tense. Notice the student does not need to recite a rule in order to get the answer correct. We didn't need to create a grid and conjugate a list of verbs. Rather, the student applies the rule in context. So, of course, the bottom square is the correct answer. Sally left her lunch on the city bus. I also want to mention the training provides students with frequent practice and immediate feedback. This practice and immediate feedback builds a level of automaticity, and this is what writing demands, applying the rules of English grammar with automaticity. The next few exercises I'm going to show you take students from constructing simple sentences to complex sentences, from a single sentence to a paragraph, and then into developing coherent multiple paragraphs. While the exercises were designed to teach reading, as an English teacher, I noticed that all of the exercise gives students practice with the sub-skills that are important for writing. Note, the training covers every rule of English grammar, but the rules of grammar are not explicitly taught. Rather, they're taught in context. In this clip, the student is learning the correct use of superlatives. So here we have, not everyone could be the best at everything. Some kids do badly in music, but do very well in art. And the next one, the kid who writes the best stories might have the worst handwriting. Most people would rather do things they are better at. You notice learning is reinforced through repetition, and in this case it was 5 trials in a row. You'll also notice feedback is immediate. The student receives rewards such as earning points, stars, and animations, which helps maintain attention and build motivation. In some ways, Hog Hat Zone, which is what we're looking at currently, is a more advanced version of Leaping Lizards. In this exercise, students are applying all of the rules in grammar in context. But the sentences are more complex and are used to build paragraphs, which forces students to maintain more content in working memory for longer periods of time, a skill which is needed for writing. And I want you to notice that just like we write in chunks or phrases, the exercise also builds sentences from phrases, and the sentences are used to build paragraphs. Let's take a look. In this example, the students are working with pronouns and verbs. In the first sentence, the student needs to look ahead to figure out which pronoun to use. They're building their working memory. It was very dark, and the wind howled around blank. But Dorothy cues the student that the correct answer is her and not him. The student did not need to know that they were applying the objective case of the pronoun. And in the next chunk, the sentence asks students to choose the correct verb tense. The rule is not to switch tenses in a paragraph. So again, the student must hold the sentence in working memory as she looks for the tense being used. And in the last sentence, the instruction returns to its focus to the correct form of the pronoun. So in the first sentence, you didn't need to know that the pronoun you're using, her, is called an objective pronoun, but you did need to know how to apply the rule for selecting the correct pronoun in the context of that sentence. Now, this third sentence calls for the same. You don't need to know that you are choosing the nominative case of the pronoun, but you do need to know how to apply it. After the first few whirls around, and one other time when the house tipped badly, she felt as if she were being rocked gently like a baby in a cradle. Throughout the training, students are presented with hundreds of decisions to be made as they apply the rules of grammar in context. What I became interested in investigating is question 1, do they internalize the rules? And question 2, can they apply the rules to their own writing? Before we answer these two questions, let's examine another exercise. In ToadLoader, students are building sentences that describe an illustration. In this exercise, the student is not physically writing sentences, but they are going through the same thought processes as if they were. Let me take you through a portion of the exercise. You see the sentence starter in front of a table of guests. In this case, the student chose happy toucan, which is wrong. The student hears a clunk, and they know that they got the wrong answer. And then the right answer appears, the Swiss chef. So they are getting that corrective feedback in real time, which is the most effective way to learn. This is a real strength that cannot be overemphasized because traditional classroom instruction cannot offer real-time student-teacher interaction that computers can. And I know this firsthand when you have 25 to 30 students in a classroom and you're trying your hardest to give them that immediate feedback. It's not as easy as what computers are able to do. So let's take a look to finish this sentence. And as you try to finish the sentence, did you notice that you needed to master the rules of grammar to get it right? It's not about matching the vocabulary. Instead, the correct answer is dependent on the verb. And finally, the student reads the complete sentence in its entirety. Let's continue in the same exercise for just a moment. Did you notice that this second sentence is building off the first sentence? This is what we do in real writing. We write connected sentences. As you try to complete this sentence, did you notice that again the correct answer is dependent on using the correct form of the verb? The patrons approved of the hamburger. Notice the rule, plural subject equals singular predicate. So the patrons approve of the hamburger. And in the most advanced level of the training, students build multiple paragraph passages. As I mentioned earlier, all of the students in both of the studies I've conducted completed all of the initial literacy training and varying degrees of the reading series. So the effects of this computer-based cognitive and literacy skills training on students' basic writing skills is what I wanted to evaluate empirically in my studies. And so now you know what the training was. Let me go through my research design. We used a randomized control trial, experimental design, because it is the most rigorous and the most credible in the scientific community. In experimental research, there is an experimental group that receives the training, and we compare them to a control group who was not trained during the study. Before students in the experimental group are trained, all students take the same pretest. After the experimental group is trained, all students take the same post-test. I've gone over the training in detail. You are probably wondering about the pre- and post-test that I use to measure the effects of training on writing. I selected the OWLS Written Expression Scale. The OWLS is the Oral and Written Language Scale, which some of you may already be familiar with. It is an independent standardized writing test frequently used in schools. The OWLS measures students' use of standard edited American English in the domains of content, linguistics, and conventions. This chart shows domains and skills tested. It is important to note that the OWLS is an independent testing measure and was chosen for its high reliability. It was also an authentic writing test, where students are physically writing answers to such questions as, write one sentence using these 4 words, have my not here. Or listen to the following passage, and the test administrator would read a 2-minute passage to the students, and the students were asked to write a retelling, which includes as many facts and details from the story that they could remember. In the original study, which took place during the 2009-2010 school year, 80 sixth grade students from the general education population were randomly assigned by the school scheduling software to an experimental group with 39 students and a weighting control group with 41 students. I was very lucky that the superintendent of the school that I was conducting the study in had her PhD and knew the necessity for randomized controlled studies. Both groups took the OWLS pretest prior to the experimental group's training. The experimental group received 9 weeks of training, 40 minutes per day, and completed all of the initial literacy training and varying degrees of reading 2 and 3. After the experimental group's training, both groups took the OWLS post-test. Excuse me, sorry about that. Before I show you the results, I want to mention the importance of attendance. The students were trained for a mean of 39 days. Remember, the semester, the marking period was a total of 45 days, and we had 2 to 3 days of orienting them with the program. Their attendance ranged from 36 to 42 days, and participation, indicating the time on task, was 89%. I'm particularly proud of our high levels of participation. Recall that we were on a 40-minute protocol, and our class time was 42 minutes. So I was able to get those students in there to their seats, signed on, and working on the program quite efficiently. And that I would like to say is because the woman who was in charge of conducting the study, she was actually a mother of 5 boys. So she knew firsthand how to be efficient with getting students on task. So, and I have a feeling that our time on task would have been even higher had we had 2 extra minutes in the class period for students to transition on and off the computers. In any case, most students were participating between 36 and 38 minutes each day. And this graph right here shows you the very encouraging results. Let's take a look at pretest. At pretest, there was no statistically significant difference between the 2 groups. You'll notice that both groups are well above the mean of 100. The fact that there was no difference between them at pretest shows that the randomization was effective, and the groups were equally matched on their writing abilities at the beginning of the study. Now let's take a look at what happened 9 weeks later. Let's first look at the control group. They received the school's standard-based literacy curriculum, but they did not complete fast-forward training. You'll notice there is no significant difference between their pre- and post-test writing scores. The scores of the control group showed little change in their writing ability. Therefore, our results cannot be accounted for by test, retest, practice effects. Now let's take a look at what happened to the experimental group. Keep in mind, these students in the experimental group were in the same literacy classes as the students in the control group. Only these students also completed Fast4Word during this marking period. You'll see that there was a striking difference between their pre-test and post-test scores. They increased a standard deviation in their writing ability as measured by the ALS Written Expression Scale. And the effect size from pre to post within the experimental group was 1.12, which is an effect size that falls within the range of what is considered an extremely large effect size. So how do these results transfer to students' writing ability in the classroom? Let's take a look. The ALS gives us an opportunity to see examples of what might be happening in the classroom in terms of the student's improved ability. Here we see an example from a sixth grade student in the experimental condition. So before Fast4Word, the student's pre-test score was 0 for question 25. Question 25 asks, write one sentence using these 4 words, have, my, not, here. And the student responded with, do you have hat? Because it is not here. Notice it's not a sentence. They're not getting points because they also didn't use all of the 4 words. So that student did not get a 0 on that. It's not grammatically correct. It did not use all 4 words. Now let's look at the post-test response. The same question, the same student, but this was after all of Fast4Word literacy and completion of Fast4Word reading 2. The student wrote, I do not have my jacket in here, and even had a strategy of crossing out the words used. And what I want you to notice is the processing speed. So students, I mean, they have what they need to get the answer done, but of course, like all students, they want to write the sentence and move on. So that cannot be undervalued. Okay, let's take a look at the next slide. Okay, in this question, again, it's a student from the experimental group. The question is, add to the following sentence additional phrases that would make the sentence more descriptive. And so in this case, the student didn't add any additional phrases. But you see, after Fast4Word literacy and nearly half of Fast4Word reading 2, the student was on fire. The boy, wearing a tank top, shorts, and flip-flops, happily mowed the lawn. And so adding that gerund phrase really showcased the student's improvement. So remember those cognitive skills necessary in order to compose a response to the NAEP writing prompt? The student must hold the math class in working memory while pulling information about those animals from long-term memory. The student must sequence the information in a coherent and convincing manner, all the while remembering the basic rules of letter writing and applying the rules of grammar to their composition. Also recall from earlier in my presentation the national results of our middle school students who have taken the NAEP. As a former English language arts teacher, I spent a lot of time focusing on the literacy skills involved in writing, which I must say, those literacy skills must be paramount to the curriculum. But as this study has shown you, based on this study's finding, it appears that intensive computer-based cognitive as well as literacy skills training improves sixth grade students' writing skills. And so before I leave you, I do want to thank the members of the Wilkes team for helping me with this study. It was their help. I stand on their shoulders. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Rogowski. And what we have up on the screen right now are all of her references for the work that she just presented. So there's 3 pages of references here. We will be sending a link to the recording out by early next week. Please submit any questions you may have. And I'll start with the question I just received so the students that were in the group that received Fast4Word were they receiving double instruction? So then were they also in some sort of regular class as well?
They were in the same literacy classes as the students in the experimental group. So what this school district did, which was really nice, was that middle schools typically will have a specials class. So picture the school year divided into 4 marking periods, and students all had their classes like social studies and math and the language arts block and science blocks. And so, and we know that true heterogeneous grouping doesn't happen in those classes. A lot of times it's dictated by being in potentially algebra at that time or a foreign language at that time. But in the middle school block was this time known as specials. And so during specials, students would participate in their health class, their gym class, their, what else? Music class, their art class. And one of those blocks was Fast Forward. And so the students, all students in that school ended up getting Fast Forward during the course of the school year. The students in our study that comprised the experimental group received Fast Forward in the 3rd marking period because that marking period had the least disruptions. And the students in the 4th marking period were the control group. So, so could it be the double dose of literacy because they're receiving Fast Forward and the standard curriculum? Well, what I have to say about that is we know the standard curriculum didn't show an improvement. So if that means the standard curriculum plus Fast Forward is giving that improvement, I mean, yes, do both. I am a proponent of the standard curriculum and then using a tool like this to accelerate all students' achievements.
Great, thank you for that answer. We did get another question about learning disabilities, to students with learning disabilities and improving their writing skills. So do you have any comments on what the groups you chose for this experiment?
We went straight, as I said, it was a heterogeneous group. It was at the beginning of the school year, students are scheduled, all 6th grade students are scheduled for their classes. And what we made sure of, and we had buy-in from administration, and we stayed true to this, was that those special classes, every student would be placed into it, and that would stay. So they were randomly selected by the computer, and we did have special education students in both the control and the experimental group, but I can't, because there weren't enough of them to create a subpopulation and do statistical analyses on them, we did not break it down. But I can tell you off the top of my head that every student improved. So that's what we found with our experimental group, that there was improvement for everyone.
Okay. The next question is, and I found this interesting too, actually, to ask you. Someone asked if Fast Forward was available at the elementary grade, and you mentioned you ran literacy with these children. I know we do have Fast Forward Language, which is more of the elementary version. So what went into your decision to do literacy versus the Fast Forward Language V2 program?
Well, in this district, one of the things that they did not do is, at the time this study was running, there were 4 or 5 small elementary schools that would then filter into the middle school. And because of budgets, we didn't buy Fast Forward site licenses, because at that point it was site licenses. We only had it in middle school at this time. So the students, and these were 6th grade students who were fresh, so none of them had participated in Fast Forward prior to the study. Now, what happened was in 6th grade, all students would receive Fast Forward. In 7th grade, then it went, participation in Fast Forward then went based on results on the state standardized assessment test. And so students received an extra 2 semesters of Fast Forward in their 7th grade year and in their 8th grade year, depending on how they achieved. We also then had students able to sign up for Fast Forward as well, especially some of our gifted students really wanted to, because if you've seen reading 4 and 5, they're quite challenging. And in fact, in that school, we actually had high school students come down and use, the Gator Jam and to prepare for some of the SATs, especially when they were doing analogies. I know testing have changed and there's not analogies, but there was a Fast Forward reading 5 exercise or reading 4 exercise that was particularly beneficial to prepare for the SAT. So we had students coming down for that as well.
Okay.
I just went off and started talking and talking. I apologize.
It's totally fine. One of our attendees was curious if I could go back to Quack Splash. Can you talk more about this exercise? Because I know that this is one section of the exercise, but can you talk a little bit more about this exercise in particular and what else it'll do?
This exercise is the student needs to read through all of that and then put the paragraphs in order. So this is one that requires attention. And it's not just something quick. You think of video games and you think of something very fast-paced. But this one you really need to slow down and pay attention. And you need to read through all of the paragraphs. And then you need to sequence the paragraphs so that you have an introduction. So in this case, it's saying select the paragraph that should come first on this page. So you want that introductory paragraph. And then in later slides or later exercises, what's going to be is what makes the next body paragraph and so on until you get to the conclusion. What is interesting about this is that as I said, this is in reading 5. So the students, back when I was showing you examples from Hog Hat Zone, I believe that was from reading 2. And you'll notice that was just sentences to make a paragraph. Now we've trained them so well that they, have the attention span to be able to read through this. And so is that what you wanted me to talk about, the cognitive skills?
Yes. And also in Quack Splash, how you have to put the sentences together to make the paragraphs, and then you put the paragraphs together to make the passage.
Yeah, so they're working with this passage for quite some time. It's not just randomly put up there. Okay,
let's hear. The other question that I have is, can you reiterate how often your students use the software?
It was every day for a marking period.
Okay, so, and it was 5 days a week?
5 days a week, every day for a marking period. And as I said, the woman who ran this study, she was just excellent. She was a teacher that was very much involved with the students in terms of, it really is dependent on the teacher that you have in the room. This is not a program where you can just say, okay, kids, sit at your computers and work, and I will be at my desk. What was successful about this is that we had a woman who was committed to achievement. And so that meant she was constantly circling around the room. She was recognizing students when they earned stars. They got a sticker, and so that made them feel really good. And so she was just really on them. And we did give them a lot of feedback. We had decided as the research group that we would have students know where they stood at the time they started each day. Then we would show them, they would be shown their scores at the end of the day to see, Fast Forward has a lot of charts filled into it. And so they would actually see their graph. And it wouldn't be every student seeing every graph every day, but ones that we could see were struggling, we would show them the graphs and say, look at how well you're doing in Stellar Story. Well, no, Stellar Story is a tough one. So is Space Racer. Look at your score in, and now some of the names are eluding me. Look at your scores here and here and here. Let's try. Why don't you come in tomorrow and work right away at Stellar Stories while you're still fresh? So we had a lot of feedback. There was a lot of feedback that was given to the students. And it was like that in this study as well as the study that I oversaw with college students. We kept them informed of their feedback. It was not just the feedback that the exercise gave them immediately after responding, but it was overall, how are they progressing? And students respond well to that.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. I'm going to wait and see if there's any other questions. There's a couple of things I do want to address to everyone while we're seeing if there's any more questions. Any kind of pricing questions, please contact me directly at webinars@scilearn.com, and I can forward you to the appropriate person. The other question is, if you have a specific question about a student that may have run on the Fast Forward products, please email me and I will get you a specific answer to your question. Also, I've been asked if we can send out the PowerPoint presentation. I'm going to be speaking with Dr. Rogowski after the session today. And if I can send it, it'll be in your thank you email that we'll send out next week. If not, we will be sending the presentation, the recording of the presentation via email next week. Let's see here. So another question, what do we have for high school students? That's another question that just came in. You want to take that one, Dr. Rogowski? What do we have for high school students?
I have not. That was probably one that you'd be better able to answer.
Okay, it's the same as what Dr. Rogowski has been talking about. High school students would start on Fast Forward Literacy, and then they would move into the reading products, and we have Reading Readiness, Reading 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Reading 5 is demonstrated right here in front of you on your screen right now, and that is what a high school student would use. So probably sixth grade through high school would use that. And also, Dr. Rogowski has results for early college age students. So definitely you can take a look at her research on that. Dr. Rogowski, do you want to speak to that a little bit? Just a minute or two?
Paula just recently did a webinar on that really gives, in that webinar, it really gives, it gives an overview of the study as well as the other results that we got. We got a reading result from that as well. But that study, yes, I completed that with the team at Rutgers. Was it 2 years ago? We followed up with that group, and we also saw a great improvement in the writing skills. The population that we targeted were students who were in the developmental writing courses at Rutgers, or students who were underrepresented minorities in STEM majors. They were in the LSAMP program. And what they were finding in the LSAMP program is that their students were doing wonderfully in the courses in their major. However, when they would go to take the MCAT, is that what they call the test for getting into being a doctor? I think it's the MCAT.
I think so.
Yeah. They were not doing well in the writing assessment. And so they approached us about using their students or offering this to their students, as well as working with the developmental writing program. And so we did, and what we did was we compared those students. We offered it to everyone in both of those programs. And so the volunteers in that program, they were our experimental group. And what we had to do then was go and get from the school at large people to be in our control group. And so what you see is that, I wish I had the slides for it, but you do see that our students in our, that used Fast Forward, their writing improved, and it even improved more than the students in the general population. So we were pretty excited about that.
Great, thank you so much. So again, there's a couple of things I want to announce before we finish the session today. So number one, you will